Trump just announced something shocking last night. The president released a statement that stunned even his closest allies. And the moment I read it, I knew this wasn't just another update. This was a turning point. It was direct. It was sweeping. And it was unlike anything he has ever declared during his presidency. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what he said, why he said it now, and what it means for every American. By the end of this video, you will understand why people are calling this the most important decision of his presidency and why it arrived when it did. So, what decision did Trump make? Why does the White House describe it as structurally transformative? And why are critics already calling it the most controversial proclamation of his presidency? I'm going to walk you through the full message clearly. Just an honest analytical breakdown. Because this matters. This affects all of us, and you deserve to understand exactly what just happened. We've all heard by now the horrific news of the 2 National Guard members. One of them, Sarah Beckham, was only 20 years old. She was born in the mid-200s, grew up in a world most of us would barely recognize, and chose to serve her country. She wanted to work on Thanksgiving. She wanted to be there protecting her fellow citizens, doing her part. And her life ended in an ambush-style shooting on the cold streets of Washington, D.C. This event led to public outrage. And I don't mean partisan anger or political posturing. I mean the kind of raw bipartisan fury that cuts across every demographic. Veterans called in to radio shows, their voices shaking. Parents wrote letters. Grandparents took to social media. The question wasn't just about this one attack. It was about how this could happen at all. How did someone with the capability and intent to ambush American service members end up in a position to do so? And that question led directly to another one. What went wrong with our screening processes? How did so many people enter the country without proper vetting? So when the public demanded answers, the president addressed the root cause head-on. But before we get to his message, we need to understand what the administration itself acknowledged about what went wrong. Because this isn't just about one person's view. This is about documented failures that multiple officials have now admitted. Here's what we know. During the chaotic withdrawal operations a few years back, thousands of people were brought into the United States on planes. And according to internal documents that have since come to light, many of these individuals were not properly vetted. In some cases, officials didn't even know their identities. There's an email dated back in 2021 where government personnel literally asked, "Do you recognize any of these people?" Let that sink in. Imagine boarding a plane, arriving in a new country, and the people responsible for your entry don't know who you are. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a documented admission of how disorganized and compromised the process became. And it's not just about 1 or 2 people slipping through. We're talking about thousands, potentially tens of thousands entering without the kind of background checks that used to be standard. And when you bypass screening, you lose the ability to distinguish, or you can't separate those who genuinely need help from those who might pose a threat. And that's where the problem lies. It's not about demonizing entire groups of people. It's about acknowledging that without proper processes, you open the door to risks that shouldn't exist. And those risks have materialized. We've seen incidents, some highly publicized, others less so, where individuals who entered through these flawed processes committed serious crimes. We've seen communities, particularly in states like Minnesota, report that they feel overwhelmed by sudden demographic shifts, by gangs, by public safety concerns that didn't exist before. Again, this isn't about blaming any one nationality or ethnicity. It's about recognizing that when systems fail, real people suffer the consequences. So, with all of this pressure rising, the White House prepared a message that would stun both supporters and critics. And if you followed politics for any length of time, you know that late-night releases often signal major shifts. They're deliberate, they're calculated, and they're designed to send a message that something fundamental is changing. The tone was serious, somber, and decisive. It opened with a direct salutation to American citizens and patriots, people who, in the president's words, had been nice in allowing the country to be divided, disrupted, carved up, and laughed at by others. That language alone raised eyebrows. It was blunt. It was confrontational. And it was meant to resonate with those who felt that America had been too accommodating, too willing to absorb problems without pushing back. The president began by addressing the scale of the foreign bee-born population in the United States. He stated that the official count stands at over 50 million people, most of whom, he claimed, are receiving some form of public assistance. Now, let's be clear. Those numbers are broad estimates, and the breakdown is more complex than any single statement can capture. But the point he was making is about strain on schools, hospitals, housing, social services. He argued that American citizens, because of their generous hearts, have been quietly bearing this burden without complaint, even as it eats away at them. Think about that for a moment. If you're an American on a fixed income, you've probably noticed changes in your community. Maybe the hospital wait times are longer, maybe the schools are more crowded, maybe housing costs have gone up because demand has outpaced supply. These are real, tangible impacts. And whether you agree or disagree with the president's framing, the underlying concern that systems are stretched is something many Americans feel. He then turned to crime and social disorder. He specifically mentioned Minnesota, where he said that hundreds of thousands of refugees from certain regions have completely taken over parts of the state. He described gangs roving the streets, people locked in their homes out of fear, and a governor, he called him seriously incompetent, who does nothing to address it. He didn't stop there. He singled out a congresswoman, referring to her by a nickname and criticizing her for, in his view, complaining about America while representing the very community that's causing concern. Now here's where it's important to step back and be analytical. Is every word of that description accurate? Probably not, in a literal sense. Are there gangs in Minnesota? Yes. Are entire communities living in fear? Some residents have reported concerns? Yes. But is the entire state taken over? That's hyperbole. It's meant to paint a stark picture to provoke an emotional response. And it works. Because even if the language is exaggerated, the underlying issues, public safety concerns, cultural integration challenges, resource strain, are real enough that people recognize the kernel of truth. And then came the sentence that changed everything. The president declared that he would permanently pause migration from certain regions to allow the United States system to fully recover. He didn't just say pause, he said permanently pause. That's a significant choice of words. It suggests not a temporary hold, but a fundamental restructuring of how the country approaches immigration from specific parts of the world. He went further. He announced that he would terminate all of what he called Biden illegal admissions, including those signed through an autopen process, which he characterized as unauthorized. He stated that anyone who is not a net asset to the United States or who is incapable of loving the country would be removed. He called for an end to all federal benefits and subsidies for non-citizens. He promised to denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility and to deport any foreign national who is a public charge, a security risk, or, and this is the phrase that caught the most attention, non-compatible with Western civilization. Let's pause here and unpack that. What does non-compatible with Western civilization mean? It's a loaded phrase. On one hand, it can be interpreted as a values-based criterion. Does someone respect democratic principles, rule of law, individual rights? On the other hand, it can be seen as a cultural or religious litmus test, which raises serious questions about fairness and discrimination. The president's message specifically mentioned Islam, stating that it has been proven to be incompatible with Western civilization, and asked rhetorically how many more times people need to hear certain phrases before acknowledging a problem. And here's the thing. To understand this moment, you don't have to agree with every word. You just have to recognize what's happening. The president is making a bet that enough Americans, especially those who feel unsafe, unheard, or overwhelmed, will support a dramatic reset. He's betting that the grief over those 2 National Guardsmen, combined with years of accumulated frustration, will create the political space for what he's calling reverse migration. And that term reverse migration is worth understanding. It means not just stopping new arrivals, but actively removing people who are already here. It means reassessing legal statuses, revoking benefits, and in some cases deporting individuals who were previously admitted. It's a massive undertaking. It would require cooperation from federal agencies, state governments, courts, and international partners, and it would without question be challenged every step of the way. So why now? Why this moment? And the answer is multi-layered. First, the tragedy provided a catalyst, a visceral, undeniable example of what can happen when vetting fails. Second, there's been a cumulative buildup of incidents and concerns that have eroded public confidence. Third, there's political calculation. The president is in his second term. And this is the kind of move you make when you're willing to absorb the controversy because you believe it's necessary. And fourth, there's a strategic element. By pausing and reassessing, the administration creates space to rebuild systems, improve processes, and restore, at least in theory, confidence in public safety. But as with any major decision, reactions came from every direction, and those reactions came fast. Within hours of the proclamation being posted, reporters at a press conference began pressing the president on specifics. They wanted to know, are you blaming all Afghans for this one incident? Are you painting entire communities with the same brush? And the president's response was telling. He didn't back down, but he also didn't generalize in the way critics expected. He said essentially, no, not all Afghans are responsible. But he insisted that there have been significant problems because so many individuals came in on those chaotic flights without any checking. He pointed to images we've all seen, planes packed wall to wall with people, desperate scenes at airports, physical strength determining who got on and who didn't. His argument was simple. In that chaos, there was no way to distinguish between those who genuinely helped the U.S. government and those who simply managed to push their way onto a plane. And then he pivoted to Somalia, reinforcing his earlier point about Minnesota. He described gangs, overwhelmed neighborhoods, and what he characterized as an incompetent governor who won't act. He used blunt language, calling officials dopes and useless. Again, this is the kind of rhetoric that fires up his base but alienates others. But it's also revealing of a deeper frustration, the sense that political correctness has prevented honest conversations about what's actually happening in certain communities. Now, here's where I want to be very clear. My job isn't to tell you what to think. My job is to help you understand what's being said, why it's being said, and what it means going forward. So let's talk about the reactions, because they're as important as the decision itself. Supporters of this proclamation see it as long overdue. They argue that for years, America has been too willing to absorb costs, financial, social, and human, without asking hard questions. They point to incidents like the one that killed those 2 National Guardsmen and say this is what happens when you prioritize ideology over safety. They believe that a nation has not just the right, but the responsibility to control who enters, to set standards, and to remove those who don't meet them. For many, this message resonates. It feels like common sense. On the other side, critics argue that the proclamation is dangerously broad, potentially discriminatory, and likely to harm innocent people. They worry about families being separated, about refugees who fled violence only to face deportation, about the moral and legal implications of denaturalizing citizens or barring entire regions. They point out that blanket bans and sweeping generalizations don't distinguish between extremists and ordinary people trying to build better lives. And they warn that this kind of rhetoric, especially the language about religious compatibility, echoes some of the darkest chapters in American history, when fear led to internment camps, exclusion acts, and policies we later regretted. So who's right? Well, that's the uncomfortable truth about moments like this. Both sides have legitimate concerns. Security is real. The need for proper vetting is real. The strain on communities is real. But so is the risk of overreach. So is the danger of punishing the innocent along with the guilty. So is the moral weight of turning away people in desperate need. And this is where history becomes instructive, because America has faced moments like this before. In the early 20th century, there were quotas and exclusions based on national origin. During World War II, there was internment. After September 11th, there were travel bans and heightened scrutiny of certain groups. Each time the nation wrestled with the balance between security and values. Each time some policies were later seen as necessary, others as mistakes. And each time the debate revealed something fundamental about what kind of country America wants to be. So what does this decision mean for America's future? Let's think through the implications step by step. First, national security. If the administration follows through on this proclamation, we're talking about a massive increase in enforcement efforts. Detention centers would need to expand. Courts would be flooded with cases. International agreements would be tested, and the message to the world would be clear. America is prioritizing control over openness, at least for the foreseeable future. A second economic impact. Whether you agree with the policy or not, removing large numbers of people from the workforce has consequences. Some of those consequences might be positive. More jobs for American citizens, less strain on wages in certain sectors. But others could be disruptive labor shortages in industries that rely on immigrant workers, decreased consumer demand, and potential retaliation from countries whose citizens are affected. Economics is complex, and any major shift in population flows ripples through the system in ways that aren't always predictable. Third, social services. This is one area where the administration's argument has traction. If federal benefits are indeed going to non-citizens at the scale claimed, then redirecting those resources could ease pressure on schools, hospitals, and housing markets. Seniors on fixed incomes might see improvements in wait times, availability, and costs. But the flip side is that abrupt removal of people also destabilizes communities, disrupts schools mid-year, and creates humanitarian challenges that local governments would have to manage. Fourth, border management. A permanent pause on migration from certain regions doesn't eliminate the need for border security. It just shifts the focus. Instead of processing asylum claims and vetting new arrivals, resources would be redirected toward enforcement and deportation. The question is whether that is a more effective use of limited resources, or whether it simply trades one set of challenges for another. And fifth, international relations. This is huge. When the President of the United States declares that entire regions are essentially unwelcome, it affects diplomacy, alliances, and America's reputation abroad. Some allies will quietly support the move. Others will publicly condemn it, and adversaries will use it as propaganda. People will say, "See, America doesn't care about human rights. America doesn't welcome those in need." Whether that criticism is fair or not, it will have consequences for how the country is perceived and how it can operate on the global stage. So, let's bring this all together. Why does this decision define the president's second term? Because it represents a crossroads, a moment where a complex, decades-old issue met a decisive, controversial answer. It's not a policy tweak, it's not an incremental change, it's a fundamental reorientation of how America approaches immigration, national identity, and security. For those who support it, this is leadership. It's a president willing to make the hard call, to absorb the criticism, to prioritize American citizens above political correctness. It's the kind of decision they believe leaders are supposed to make in times of crisis, bold, clear, and unapologetic. For those who oppose it, this is overreach. It's a president using tragedy to justify policies that are too broad, too punitive, and too dismissive of the values that have historically defined America as a refuge and a land of opportunity. It's the kind of decision they worry will be remembered as a moment when fear triumphed over compassion. And for historians, well, they'll debate this for years. They'll look at the data on crime, on integration, on economic impact. They'll examine whether the security gains justify the human costs. They'll compare this moment to other periods of restrictionism and ask whether it was necessary or excessive. But one thing is certain, they'll recognize it as a defining moment because decisions this sweeping don't come along often. And when they do, they shape the trajectory of a nation. Now, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. If you're a senior watching this, you've lived through a lot. You've seen America change in ways both wonderful and challenging. You've watched leaders come and go. You've experienced moments of unity and moments of division. And you've probably learned that the truth is rarely as simple as either side wants to make it. This decision, this proclamation, is not going to be easy to implement. It's going to face legal challenges. It's going to be debated in Congress, in courts, in town halls, and around dinner tables. And that's actually a good thing, because that's how democracy works. Big decisions should be contested. They should be examined from every angle, and the outcome should reflect not just the will of one leader, but the collective judgment of a nation. What matters now is that we stay informed, that we don't just react emotionally, but think critically, that we ask questions. What are the actual facts? What are the trade-offs? What are the alternatives? And what kind of country do we want to be? Not just today, but for our children and grandchildren. Because here's the thing, America has always been a work in progress. It's never been perfect. It's stumbled, corrected course, and stumbled again. But the reason it endures is that enough people in every generation care enough to engage, to debate, to vote, to hold leaders accountable, and to demand better when things go wrong. So, as we close, let me bring everything back to where we started. A tragedy shook the nation. 2 young National Guardsmen gave their lives in service to their country. The public demanded action, and the president responded with what he's calling the most significant immigration directive of his presidency, a permanent pause on migration from certain regions, a commitment to reverse previous admissions, and a restructuring of how America evaluates and supports those who enter. Whether you see this as necessary or dangerous, one thing is undeniable. It's a decision that will shape the next chapter of American history. It's a moment where grief, frustration, and policy collided, and the consequences, good, bad, and complicated, will unfold in the months and years ahead. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like this video so more people can understand what this decision actually means. And if you want to stay updated on what happens next after this historic move, subscribe and leave a comment below. I read every single one of them, and your perspective genuinely matters. This moment affects all of us, and your voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring enough to stay informed, and remember, the story doesn't end here. It's just beginning. Stay engaged, stay thoughtful, and stay hopeful that whatever comes next, America will find its way through, because it always